Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So, if you've been online at all for the last couple of days, then you know that the Xbox community is on fire, and not in a good way. It all started with these rumors that Xbox is going third party, right? We heard it first with smaller games like, oh, Hi-Fi Rush might be going to Switch, or Sea of Thieves might be going to PlayStation, and then it's just sort of devolved from there to the point where people are saying Starfield is booting back up a PlayStation version, or that new Indiana Jones game that isn't even out is now working on a PlayStation version, or possibly the most insane one, that they're planning on porting Gears of War and Halo to other console platforms. And this has caused the Xbox fan base to just explode. And I understand why they are to an extent, because, like, from the outside, it's really easy to just go, like, oh, well, more games are going to be more playable by more people or whatever. Like, putting more games on other platforms is going to result in more people being able to play those games, which on the surface is a good thing, and in the short term is a good thing. But I think if you really break down into the long term of what that would mean, it could potentially have some damaging effects, and we'll definitely talk about that. But we're talking about the Xbox community just kind of exploding. There's been multiple, like, 8 to 10 hour long Twitter spaces about how people are trading in their Xboxes and how they're not Xbox fans anymore. There's been just really popular social media creators talking about how they're going to retire the brand of their entire account and just stop doing the things that they've been doing for the Xbox community for almost a decade in some cases. And it's really disappointing. And while I do think that those people are wildly overreacting to something that we don't know what's going on yet, I think it's also largely Xbox's fault for not saying anything of value in this time. So these rumors started coming out and everyone started popping off. And the only thing that Xbox has said about it is Phil Spencer put out a tweet saying, "We're listening and we hear you. We've been planning a business update for next week where we look forward to sharing more details with you about our visions for the future of Xbox. Stay tuned." And I hate to be sort of the negative person on this. They would have 100% have just been better saying nothing, because that's nothing substantial. You're not telling us what any of the news actually is. You're not putting out any of the fires that these rumors have caused in the community. And on top of that, you've confirmed that at least some of the rumors are undoubtedly true, that you felt the need to talk about it and say, like, hey man, we are going to talk about this, but next week. And so basically all you've said is, like, you've just set people up to sort of, like, do the WebMD thing where you're saying something is happening. Here are all these rumors that we're not talking about. Spend the next week self-diagnosing and thinking that the worst case scenario is 100% going to happen, which in reality, it's not, right? More than likely, it's going to be just some weird convoluted thing that they think is going to make them more money, and that most people in the consumer space won't even recognize has changed anything. I think that's the most likely scenario. But what I want to look at is the absolute best case scenario and the absolute worst case scenario, because I feel like that's where people's mindsets are. And I don't really want to downplay it too much, because first of all, Xbox is doing a really, really bad job of, like, handling the social aspects of these rumors. And also, this has a very high potential of dramatically changing the way the games industry works. And I think that's really interesting in potentially a really negative way or potentially a really exciting way. And so that's the aspect that I want to take when talking about this. So I want to start this with the absolute worst case scenario because, well, frankly, I want to end the video on a more positive note. And also because based on what I've been seeing online and the DMs I've been sent and all that sort of thing, it feels like this is the spot where most of the larger Xbox content creators are in right now. I think it's very easy for people who have been tuned into specifically the Xbox side of this industry to assume the worst in cases like this, because Xbox has been known to step on rakes and trip over their own feet in the past, to a really terribly consistent level. So I want to again reiterate that I don't actually think that this is probably likely, because I think that Xbox would have to be smarter than to do this. But this is what people will do the WebMD thing and end up coming to, and that is that Xbox is just putting all of their games on other platforms, and no one else is doing it, and it's completely left field. We're going to put all our games on other platforms. That's the absolute worst case scenario, and this is why. Yes, there would be some pros to it, at least in the short term, right? We would see more people getting to play those games, which is always good. I actually don't really like exclusivity, but I think there's reasons why it exists, and the only way for it to break down would be for everyone to agree to break it down at the same time, and I don't think that's going to happen. But if just Xbox was like, and we're going to put all our games on PlayStation, yes, more people would get to play it, but there's a lot of negatives. And also, it would show short-term success for Xbox, because they would sell a lot more copies of that game just by nature of it being on platforms like Switch and PlayStation, who have sold a lot more units and therefore can sell a lot more games over there. There's probably a lot of people who'd be like, oh man, I can play Halo on my PlayStation now? Of course I'm going to buy into that, right? And so I think that's a really good thing for them, but it would be a very short-term win. And here's why. I think that it is, if they were to do that, it would be pretty platform destructive. It would get to a point very quickly where there wouldn't really be a reason to own an Xbox or to interact with the Xbox community in any way other than playing Xbox games on your actual favorite platform, right? Which is also extremely damaging to the brand of Xbox. Like, there's if less people are buying into your product and thinking less of your product, then that name sort of becomes mud. Not immediately, but in the long term. And this is why it's a slippery slope, right? I mean, look at what we've already seen with the rumors. As it started with really small games like Hi-Fi Rush or live service games like Sea of Thieves, things that you can kind of imagine would make sense on other platforms, even if it would upset some people. Like, you can kind of understand some of the business sense there. And then it very quickly escalated to big games, but from acquired studios that maybe have some kind of legacy elsewhere. So like Starfield or the Indiana Jones rumors, you're like, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not the craziest thing. And then it immediately went to the craziest thing, which was Halo and Gears being playable on PlayStation, right? Because once you've hit Halo and Gears on PlayStation, that's all games. So, and that's exactly the way it would go, right? Is you would start putting the smaller games on there, and you would see return of money. You would see that short-term return of money from starting sales on another platform, and you'd be like, oh, well, we could make more money with these other games. If we're making that off these smaller games, think of the money we could make on these bigger games. And so that sort of snowballs. And then once everything is launching on PlayStation at some point, then the timed exclusivity of that starts going down, because right now we're talking about games that have been out for a while. I think even the rumor of the Indiana Jones one is like it would be a timed exclusive for Xbox and then it would go to PlayStation, like I think it was like 6 or 12 months afterwards. But if they start seeing the success on that front financially, then that timed window is going to also start dropping. It's going to start at like 18 months and then go to 12 and then 6, and then before you know it, it's going to be day and date we're launching the next Halo on Xbox and PlayStation and Switch if it's powerful enough, I guess. And as they sort of slip ass first down this slippery slope that they've created for themselves, people will start falling off the brand. It's going to very quickly become, in this scenario, should it prove to be true, it's going to very quickly become a scenario where there won't be any reason to own an Xbox. I know people have been saying that since they started putting their games on PC, but it would never be more true than it is now, where if you know that every single game that Xbox ever makes is going to show up on PlayStation, as they're sliding down that slope, people are going to hit their different breaking points and just not care about Xbox anymore. They're going to start buying all their games on PlayStation. Xbox completely gives up on that 30% that they make on every single game sold on their platform. And then people just stop buying Xboxes altogether, right? It really will turn into a situation where less and less people will buy the consoles, less and less people will buy hardware on, or will buy software on that platform, because why bother? If I can get every single game that both PlayStation and Xbox makes on my PlayStation, but I can only get the games that Xbox makes on my Xbox, why am I going to spend another $500 to get an Xbox when I can already get every single thing that is going to be on the Xbox on my PlayStation? Like, there's no reason to. And people are smart enough in the consumer space to not blow $500 on a thing that they don't objectively need, especially once that timetable starts coming down. Once it's at like 6 months or day and date especially, there's absolutely no reason to buy an Xbox. And at that point, they will stop making an Xbox. It's going to be a very easy argument for the board to make, to be like, well, no one's buying things games here anymore. So what's the point of us making this hardware? And they'll be completely clueless to the fact that the reason that no one's buying games on their platform is because they killed it with this really stupid idea. But they'll continue to just follow these short-term goals, these short-term like metrics-based gains, not being completely incapable of looking at the long term, because they just need that constant growth. And they will have basically completely killed their platform, right? And this will be not just detrimental to Xbox. I know that there's probably some people on the PlayStation side who are like celebrating this. I've definitely seen that online, where they're like, oh man, Xbox is dead. This is the end. This isn't something that anybody should want, because if Xbox goes out of the game space, which this very easily could turn into a slippery slope situation where that's exactly what happens, then PlayStation kind of ends up in a de facto monopoly. And there's a lot of reasons why we like to avoid monopolies in industries, especially if the person who's going to have that monopoly is already maybe not the most credible or respectable part of the industry, in my opinion. But, you know, it's when you have a monopoly, it becomes that situation where absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if it's PlayStation, well, they're already about halfway there right now. We've already seen that they want to start hiking the prices of their games back up, largely to justify the ridiculous ballooning budgets that they've made for their games. But if they don't have to compete with Xbox anymore, then they're going to do that frame one. The second that they feel confident in that monopoly, they will raise those prices to $80, maybe $100, because that's the price that they would have to be to justify the budget that they put on something like a Spider-Man 2. And we already know that they want to do it. So once there's no negative repercussions to them doing it, why would they not? There's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't do it. And then there would be also no need for them to push to innovate in either hardware or software. They will just do the thing that makes them the most money and absolutely nothing else, because there won't be any reason to compete, right? People who are going to choose a console over a PC are already going to choose a console. They don't have to compete with the PC space really at all. But it would also allow them to raise the price of the hardware as well, because right now consoles don't make a profit like off of the individual sale. And if their next closest competitors are a handheld that runs games at 720p if you're lucky, and an extremely powerful like $2,000 PC, they can very easily raise the price of the PlayStation to $700-800 to justify the hardware that's going into it. But they won't actually make it any more powerful, because as long as it's more powerful than the Switch, they don't need to do anything, right? And Nintendo's never going to really step up into the hardware space. You know, that's just not something that we've ever heard of them really caring about, because why bother? But so yeah, so they won't innovate in the game space anymore. They will continue to make nothing but the live service games that they're already failing and bouncing off of. They'll make nothing but the third-person action-adventure games that are good, but are going to get stale really fast if they haven't already gotten stale for you. I know that some people are pretty upset about that already. There won't be any reason for them to support the indie space because every game's going to be pretty much a de facto exclusive to their platform anyway. So what's the point? Like, they're not going to do anything to help bolster creativity or discoverability for indie games because there's no reason to. You know, why would they put the money into that when it's not? Right now, a lot of the reason why these companies support indies is because it's just like one more feather in their cap where they can be like, we have this cool indie, you should come and play this over here because it's not over there, right? And if they don't have to do that, then they won't. They just simply will not. So the indie space is going to immediately fall into a lot of disrepair, and it's just it would be a situation where the game space would become absolutely creatively bankrupt because there would be no competition to push it to innovate, right? Innovation is expensive and risky, and people don't do that if they're comfortable. If people are comfortable and they don't feel the need to continuously improve in order to stay ahead of their competition, then they won't. Because if you can continue to do the surefire thing that's going to make you all of the money all of the time, you're going to do that forever. And so the game space would wind up in this monopolistic, stale, creatively bankrupt scenario that would be objectively bad for every single person involved. And so that is the absolute worst case scenario. I don't necessarily think that any of that is going to happen, but I just wanted to explain here what people are afraid of. And I think that it's partially justified because Xbox has been known to do really stupid things in the past and is doing absolutely nothing to calm these rampant emotions online. So I understand why people are winding up in this space, even though I don't think this is likely. I think Xbox would have to be absolutely out of their mind for this to be what they're going to announce next week. But I also think they're out of their minds for making the entire community wait a full week before actually telling them what's going on, or even saying like, hey, it's not what you think, tune in next week. Like, you could literally just say it's not as bad as you think it is, and that would be something, but instead they've decided to do nothing. And so this is where people in the community's mind space goes. I think another aspect of this that needs to be addressed and is sort of one of the biggest culprits into why people are so upset about this is just the timing of it all, right? I think particularly in the hardcore Xbox fan base, people have been following along with Xbox for the 20 some odd years of them really trying to break into the game space. It's sort of an underdog story. Which sounds ludicrous talking about Microsoft, who's like $1 trillion company. I think they like are currently battling with Apple for the most expensive or most valuable company on the planet. But in the game space, at least, they are sort of an underdog, and they've been trying for 20 some odd years to become a real power in gaming. And it was finally after the end of the Activision Blizzard acquisition, because you put that on top of like the ZeniMax acquisition and their existing first party family, which was already pretty decent. And we've gotten to a point where looking at the Xbox family, it's like they are finally at a point where they can really substantively compete with Nintendo and PlayStation in a very real way. Like, they have franchises now that people would switch consoles to play, that people would buy a new console to play. Something that they have been trying to get for the entire time that they have been getting into the game space. And they've had it hit and miss. You know, they had Halo, they had Gears, those were big ones, but like really since then, kind of nothing. And now they are back into a place where they can really compete. They could finally like attract people to their platform and become, you know, on par at least with PlayStation. And it feels like they're kind of throwing that away before they ever really give it a shot. Like, we're not even a year separated from them acquiring Activision Blizzard, and all we've heard is they laid off a bunch of people and now this, right? And I think that's really upsetting for the hardcore Xbox fan base, which I'm sort of adjacent to. I am friends with a lot of the hardcore Xbox fan base. I prefer Xbox. I have been on an Xbox podcast, but I am definitely outside of that bubble of like, this brand is my life, you know? But I'm close enough to it that I can see what's going on inside it and sort of feel the emotion coming out of it. And that's what I've been picking up from all of this. And it's especially weird because like this is a year where they were free and clear. Like for this to come out in 2024 when PlayStation has absolutely nothing going on in their first party, where Nintendo has currently nothing announced. I think the rumor or assumption is that the Switch 2 is going to come out, and I'm sure they'll have some pretty big titles to come alongside that. But that almost certainly won't be until, tail end of the year. And again, PlayStation is absentee. So this was really like a surefire open net situation for Xbox. And for this news to come out right now is like, it's just, they shot themselves in the foot really hard before ever even really making a substantive push to become a real powerhouse in the games industry. They bought all of these things and then they went, we can't do it. I may as well put it over on PlayStation. Like that's what it feels like. That's the energy that people are picking up from this. And again, I think it's pretty justified. Like it just feels like they both put in all of the effort to finally break into the game space in a real way at the exact same time that other aspects of the company decided to throw in the towel. And again, I think that this is, if true, I think that this is one of those examples of being extremely short-sighted and looking at the short-term gains as opposed to what you could turn your platform into. And it's honestly, if this worst case scenario turns out to be true, I'm going to be pretty disappointed and just like really negative towards the video game space for a little while, I think, because it's going to be a negative across the board for just everyone involved. Once they start that backslide into a PlayStation de facto monopoly and PlayStation is capable of just dictating what kind of games get made pretty much across the board, which kind of games get seen, which kind of games get played, because they'll become the de facto platform, which they already kind of are to an extent, but they still have to compete as it is right now, and they wouldn't if Xbox were to shoot themselves in the head, which they might be doing. PlayStation would basically become the McMahons of the video games, and like that's what an awful nightmare that would be. But let's talk about what the best case scenario is. And again, just like the worst case scenario, I don't think this is particularly likely just because it's a real pipe dream. But the absolute best case scenario is that the reason that they can't say anything about it right now is because PlayStation and potentially Nintendo are also doing the same thing, and they're going to all announce it at the same time. And we're going to go into a situation where all of the big three, after a year, 18 months, whatever it is, start putting their games on their other platforms, which would be an abject win for literally every single person involved. It would be a fundamental shift in the way the games industry operates. We would enter into basically a new golden age of video games. And I think there's a couple reasons for it. Number one, consumers win across the board in this scenario. There is no part of this that could potentially be bad for consumers that I can think of, because now it gets to a point where you don't have to buy every platform, right? You can just buy whichever one you particularly think is the best, whatever controller or hardware or whatever that you prefer. You can just buy that one and be sated. If you are one of those people who you have to be part of the conversation for absolutely every game that comes out immediately, then you'll still probably end up buying multiple consoles just because it's like, oh, well, the new Halo came out, I want to play that, but the new God of War comes out 2 weeks from now and I want to play that too without having to wait a year. Those people will still buy everything, but there wouldn't be a 100% necessity to, you know what I mean? And so that's a win for consumers. And you also get to play whatever you want, wherever you want, right? You get to play every single game that you want to play without having to be like, look at the factoids of like, oh, is this game coming to PlayStation? Is this game coming to Xbox? No, you can just look at this game is existing, and therefore it will be on the platform that I like at some point. which is an absolutely massive win. It would also mean a huge boost in the necessity for innovation, both in the hardware and software space. Hardware is obvious, right? If the video games are going everywhere, then you're really competing largely with your hardware. You're saying you should wait to play God of War on this Xbox because we do this so much better, or vice versa, right? And then on the software space, you're also still competing with your software if it's still timed exclusive for like a year, but now the software has to launch in a finished, complete, and good state that is compelling enough to make people be incapable of waiting that extra year to play it on the platform that they prefer. Is you have to make a game that is so good, so amazing, that people cannot help themselves but buy it on your platform, even if it's not the one that they prefer. So you have to innovate. You have to make better games. You have to make more complete games that run better and function better at launch. It would be an absolute landswell victory for every single consumer across the board. I genuinely cannot think of a negative aspect for the consumers of how this works. And I think it would even be positive for the people making the games and the people selling the games, for the big three especially, because if you think about it like this, right, Xbox and PlayStation, obvious, their things are pretty obvious, right? PlayStation needs more money because their budgets are out of control. They get to sell their games on other platforms eventually. They've already started doing it on PC and are probably seeing some pretty good success there. So why not also sell it on Xbox and Nintendo if it's powerful enough, right? You still get that same, you're just making more money off the same product. If you can make more money while spending less money, it's a huge positive for them, and it's going to be able to allow them to justify the budgets that they've been putting in, or at least survive long enough to figure out what they're doing with those budgets. And on the Xbox side, it's even more of a positive because PlayStation and Nintendo are such larger fan bases or player bases that a year after Starfield comes out, it comes out on PlayStation, and then there's, what are we at, like 40-50 million people have a PS5 right now or something, right? So that's a huge another group of people who can buy your product. And again, it's more money it's more money for a single product, which is only going to be more sustainable for the games industry in terms of its health. This will also mean that people working on the games wouldn't necessarily have to, make sure that this game is the absolute most money-making thing that it possibly could be, because if you're selling it on these other platforms, you don't necessarily have to cram in like a $20 skin system or like a weird gotcha system. They probably still would, because like they still want the money, but you don't necessarily have to, right? So probably at least some people would stop or do it less, right? So the people working on the games don't have to like do all this soul-crushing work. They wouldn't, I don't know that it's going to stop things like crunch or anything like that, but that's what the union coming in is hopefully going to fix. So it would just be a win across the board. And then Nintendo, I realized I didn't say how it's a win for Nintendo. Nintendo gets to basically just become the handheld, the like de facto handheld for the PlayStation and the Xbox, right? Or yeah, where it's like, yeah, I'm playing my Mario on this, but I can also take Halo multiplayer on the train to work, or I can play God of War on my Switch instead of also having to buy a Steam Deck or a ROG or whatever, right? So it would be this real like unified stance of the big three coming together and saying, this is our industry, in a time where honestly right now it's pretty questionable that there's these other big companies that are trying to break in. We're talking about Google and Apple and Amazon, who are trying to break into the game space, and will probably do it through large acquisitions if they do, and it would be just a real mess. If PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo can come together and sort of solidify their borders of like, we are the games industry, that's a huge win for them, for us. If exclusivity becomes something that across the board is timed, it is there is nothing negative I can think of that could possibly come out of it. I'm sure there is some negatives somewhere. I in this moment cannot think of what those are. Feel free to leave them in the comments if you want to tell me I'm an idiot. You won't be the first person to tell me I'm an idiot, so go for it. But this could be the entryway into a brand new golden age of video games where everyone wins. So I understand why people online are so upset about this. It's human instinct to assume the worst is going to happen. It's a survival mechanism. And I don't want to downplay how serious this could turn out to be. I mean, Xbox has made a lot of mistakes in the past, will make a lot of mistakes in the future, undoubtedly, and are not doing anything to come out and try and calm people down, really. So I get it. I understand why everyone is so upset, because I do think whatever they announce next week has a very high probability of fundamentally changing how the games industry works. The combination of these rumors with them being so cagey about it makes me think that something big is going to happen. But we have to hope that it's the best case scenario, because there's really nothing else we can do right now. Once they make their announcement, if it's awful, then people in the community can act. That we can speak out if we hate it. We can vote with our wallets and just not buy products there anymore, which is probably what would end up happening if it was the worst case scenario anyway. So may as well start it. Xbox has shown in the past that they are willing to respond to consumer concerns, that they are willing to change course when people are particularly up in arms about something. They did it at the start of the Xbox One generation. They did it with some recent price hikes that didn't go over well. Like, they are moldable by the reactions of their consumer base. So if it is the worst case scenario, it's not necessarily the end of the world. But until we know what it actually is, what the announcement actually is, what their plans going forward actually are, all this anger and hate is misdirected. We can't really be upset about it because we don't even know what to be upset about. This next week is going to be chaos online. It's going to be really hardcore Xbox fanboys freaking out. It's going to be really hardcore PlayStation fanboys partying and pretending that it's going to be a good thing if Xbox dies. You're going to see people trading in their Xboxes, and probably we'll get one of those videos where somebody like throws it down a staircase or something and breaks it. We've been seeing a lot of nonsense, and that's going to continue until such time as we get the real information, unfortunately. But I wanted to come out here and tell you guys that there is nothing we can do about it right now, and we don't even know if what's going to happen is going to be something that we don't like yet. So I understand people being upset. I think that it's completely justified, and I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. But I think we just need to go into sort of a wait and see, because I think there is an equally high probability of it being something that we end up liking as opposed to something that we end up hating. So I don't know. I hope that's true. I hope that has in some way alleviated maybe some of the stress or concern that all of you have. I have absolutely no knowledge of what's going to happen, and the fact of the matter is really nobody does. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think, what you feel about this in the comments below. I'd love to get just a vibe check on where people are at with this. If you like this content, subscribe to the channel. Do all the things. You know what the things are. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, make this channel grow. I'd love to hit 1,000 subscribers pretty soon. But whatever, until next week when we find out what's actually going on, I'll see you around.